everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dee Bloomberg, and I'm the project manager for the Clinical Coordinating Center, the CCC, for the NIDA CTN. I've been at MS for over 5 years now, and I'm a social psychologist by training. And Abby?
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Matthews. I am the co-PI for the Data and Statistics Center at the CTN. I'm also a statistician, and I've been working at MS and the CTN for almost 7 years now. And I have done multiple presentations on data share and secondary analyses. So I'm very excited for Dee and I to talk to this group about data share. So Dee, I'm going to hand it off to you for the first portion.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to start by just giving you an overview of our objectives for today. What we'd like to do is review the structure of the website, of the DataShare website, understand the information provided and how to access it, and finally to demonstrate the technical procedures for using the data sets for conducting secondary analyses. Now, before we really get into the material, we were curious and wanted to ask you whether you have ever been to the DataShare website before today, not anything in preparation for this presentation. But if you wouldn't mind clicking either yes or no and pressing the submit button, that would be great, and we'll get a sense of your previous experiences. All right, so we have most of the people, about 2/3 of the folks answering have not been to the DataShare website. That was similar to kind of what I was expecting. I think it's similar to what I've heard from other groups that we've asked this to. And I think that's great. That's great for the purpose of this presentation because I think it's a great resource, and I hope that by the end of today when you see how to use it and how valuable it could be, you could really be among those that do use it. Great. Okay, so let's go on and start. First, what is DataShare? So this is a website, and it really is a repository of all publicly available studies funded by NIDA. So you can find the data for all the CTN trials. Those are 36 right now, and also recently non-CTN trials, and there are about 15 of those studies. DTMC involves studies that develop or identify medications to treat substance use disorders, so they're very relevant for kind of CTN users as well. So there's a lot of resources there. There has been a lot of use of DataShare. There have been over 4,000 downloads from over 80 countries worldwide. So this is very interesting. Just the amount of countries that use this data is extremely interesting. As we go on today, you'll see kind of why and how that might be useful to different people. I think some of the main goals of DataShare are to optimize research productivity and use of resources. So as you know, a lot of time, a lot of money goes into these trials, and sharing the data really adds value and optimizes the use of these resources, and ultimately we can answer more research questions with the same number of trials. So it's a really ideal way to work. It also promotes new research and encourages secondary data analysis. This is especially helpful when we have people with different backgrounds, different perspectives taking a look at the data. So again, very valuable. And also facilitating career development. So by providing this free open resource for anyone to use, we're really offering a valuable opportunity that some people don't have, and at some countries might be more difficult than others. So, so that's why in the previous map we saw just an overwhelming number of countries represented, and that could be especially useful in some where the resources are more scarce for actually implementing their own research. NIDA encourages the use of data share. It's very interested and recommends people to use this great data that's available and provides funding opportunities to do just that. So there is one open currently, and this is the third or fourth iteration of the same grant. So that's something for those of you who are interested, either now or in the future, to kind of be aware of. Now, some more specific examples that I wanted to share. So these are some other ways you might be using data share. And those include grant applications, either for preliminary data, for sample size calculations, doing secondary analyses, looking at secondary outcomes, either for one particular study or across studies. And there are other things like meta-analyses and various other ways that you can use this data. Now, it's important to briefly review the data share policies. The trial data for studies is posted 18 months after database lock or after the primary manuscript is published, whichever comes first. All CTN studies are posted to data share, and only de-identified data is included. So that is very important. This is really done in order to protect the rights and the privacy of the participants in our trials and still provide this helpful resource for others. And Abby is going to talk about this a little more in her section, as well as having only raw data provided here. So in terms of data share policies, in terms of the control or security, this is truly open access. So a lot of other institutes and a lot of other organizations have the same type of data share portals. They range on a continuum from very controlled to very open, and this one is truly open access. You do not need a proposal. You do not need an IRB approval for the specific research question that you want to investigate. There is no fee, so it really is designed to encourage use. However, you must agree to terms and conditions of use, and we're going to go over those point by point a little later in the presentation. And one of the big items there is that when you're publishing or presenting data that was that you use data share for, you pull data from the website, you really should recognize the data source, the NIDA data share. Now, use of any data beyond what is publicly available also needs to go through the publications committee. And if you want more information about that, you can contact Jack Blaine or George Bigelow about specifics. And we'll go over some more specifics as well. Now, the next thing I wanted to do is provide a little overview of some of the posted studies that we have on data share. So the website is really organized by protocol or study. And these studies are most often multi-site randomized controlled trials where the primary outcome is substance use related. Sometimes you'll have the timeline follow-back, so kind of self-reported substance use or a UDS, either in drug screen, but that is most often the case. Duration, these interventions and follow-ups are usually 3 to 6 month time range, and the sample size is generally between 100 and 500. Now, again, with over 50 studies on the website, you're going to see some variation, but this is to give you a general idea if you haven't yet explored the site so that you know what to expect. There are different types of interventions. Some studies are behavioral in essence. Others are medication studies, and some are a combination of behavioral and medication. So you'll find all of these. And there are also specific areas of interest. So, for example, there's certain studies that look at HIV population. There are certain studies that are with adolescents. So you can look at those type of features as well, a really diverse collection of studies. In terms of assessments, some of the common assessments in the CTN studies include the timeline follow-back. So that is a self-reported measure of substance use. The UDS, the urine drug screen, the Addiction Severity Index, the ASCII Lite. And what I'm showing you here is the broader categorization that you can find on the website of the different assessments. So we've categorized every assessment that is used in the CTN trials into one of 10 categories. The two biggest categories are substance use and mental health. They have the largest number of measurements of assessments related to them, and so they are also categorized into subcategories. So within substance use, there's tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. And those are some things that I'll go into more detail when we go to the website. We'll do a little demonstration as well. Now, for each posted study, there is a real wealth of material. There's metadata. There are important study documents beyond having the actual study data. So in terms of study documentation, you will have a brief description of the study, the PI, the protocol, so you'll be able to pull the actual protocol document, the link to the primary manuscript if it's available, and that's from the CTN dissemination library. Some documents related to the data documentation include annotated CRFs, a data dictionary, and de-identification notes to see how that was done for that particular study. And I wanted to show some examples. So the secondary analyses that are done are either for individual studies, so you might take the data and examine something that was not looked at previously in the primary outcome paper, or you could analyze pooled data from several CTN studies. And I'll show you some recent examples. The first one is a very recent example of a study that was published that you might recognize. Here they did a pooled analysis of 22 CTN studies and examined the mortality rates among SUD participants, so substance use disorder participants. Because most substance abuse disorder treatment trials are too short and too small to really estimate rare events like death, the authors pooled data across those 22 studies to be able to calculate the mortality rate. So I think this is a really perfect example of how data share can be used and the power of having this data and this resource for being able to make these kind of calculations and find this kind of data. I'll show you a couple of other examples. This next example, in this next one, the authors pulled data from two studies, from CTN 001 and CTN 002. Both of them use similar assessments, and the particular measures the authors were interested in is the ASCII, the Addiction Severity Index, and the HIV Risk Behavior Scale. And they use those to show the association between depressive symptoms, substance use, and HIV-related high-risk behaviors among opiate-dependent individuals. So again, a very nice way to use similar measures across studies and use that pooled data to be able to answer some important research questions. And this last one, again, using the same data from CTN1 and CTN2, here they pooled the data from these studies to look at gender and racial differences in addiction severity, HIV risk, and quality of life among adults in opiate detox. So again, these are very interesting, very important questions, and a nice use of this data to continue the examination and just showing you the wealth of things that you can find from the same data. Good. Another thing I wanted to mention while we're here is the CTN dissemination library. You can find all of the articles that I just showed you and many more in the CTN dissemination library, as well as presentations that use data share data and other important information. Now, I'm going to show a short demo, but before that I wanted to show you some screenshots to illustrate some of the points, some of the areas of the site. So this is the home page. This is what you can expect to see on the home page. There's a purpose. The purpose of the data share is explained, some of the basic information and materials that you can find for each study, some information on the protection of our participants, and the data formats that you can request. There is a guidelines tab, and two important things here are the registration agreement and the data share policy, and I'll show you both of those. So the registration agreement includes several things. These are all very reasonable and straightforward. For example, maintain the security of the data. Don't send this data to anyone else. Don't use it to try to establish participants' identities. Acknowledge NIDA in publications and presentations where you've used data share. Notify your IRB as needed if any projects are based on the data that you're going to be using. And that NIDA may contact you about your publications in the future. So these are very basic items. And the data share policy, I mentioned this, and it basically shows when the study data is available, when it is posted to the site, and what material is posted for each of the studies. There is an other links tab, and here you have links to the CTN dissemination library that I mentioned, as well as other very useful resources. And the final thing that I wanted to show you before we move into the demo is the frequently asked questions tab. And this is something that, especially if it's your first time using the website, I would suggest going to. There are questions that have been asked multiple times by different researchers, and you will probably be able to find them here. That said, there is also an option to contact those from the website. So on the home page, once we do the demo, you'll see an email a link to an email where you can ask questions, and if you're having any problems, you can contact them. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our live demonstration. All right, so this is the DataShare website. For those of you that have not been here previously, you can have a sense of how it looks. And for those of you that have been here, you might notice that it's been updated recently. So there are some changes both in the appearance, so it looks very different, and also in some of the functionality. And also a lot of new data sets, so that's something that's good to look at as well. Here is the contact link, so if you have any questions, you could go here, or comments. And I think everyone is very open to receiving comments about the website, so feel free. If there's something that you're having trouble accessing, or just an idea you have for our organization, or anything else that can be helpful, just feel free to really use this. Now, most of the tabs I've gone over, but the two major ones are ones I wanted to do right now, and those are the data and the assessment tabs. So if you click on the data tab here, you will see the listing of all of the posted trials to DataShare. You can see that they're organized by division, for example, DTMC or CTN, study number, title, investigators, and release date. Another new feature of the website is being able to search by keyword. So let's say I'm interested in smoking. I can go down this list, and you'll notice that the keywords, some of them are medication related, some of them are assessments, some of them are by population. So you can look, let's say I'm interested in adolescent studies. I could click on adolescent and see if there were any adolescent studies with data that is posted, and I see that there are. Similarly, if I want to look at a specific area, I could look by keyword. I think I said smoking earlier, so I could click there, apply, and take a look at those studies. So this is a nice and quick way to do things, but if you want to see everything, you just go to data and you have all of it there. So let's see, in one of the examples, I showed you an article that was done using data from CTN1 and CTN2. So the way they would have done it in order to actually get the data is to click on the study number. And so this is how all the material and information that you get for every study that is posted. So you have the title, investigator, the description of the protocol, and then on the left-hand side, under the description, there are some important keywords, and there's a list of the assessments that were used in the study. So that is all very valuable information. And then on the right side, you can see the study links. So you have a link to the primary manuscript that you can pull. You have study information and the clinicaltrials.gov link. And additionally, you can pull the actual protocol, the annotated CRFs, the case report forms, the de-identification notes, and additional documents. Now for the actual data, so if you wanted to request the actual data from the study, you would just click under study data. You'll see that it is pretty straightforward. You have the same agreement that we talked about with the same items of how you keep the data secure, you don't share it, and so on. And the items to complete here are your name, email, and country. And once you submit that, you're able to receive the data files. So it's a very simple process, again, really with the aim of encouraging use of the site. So that is the data tab. One more thing that I wanted to show you, and this one is my favorite, is the assessments tab. And here you can find all on the main assessments page, you can find all of the assessments that are used in the trials in alphabetical order. Some unique searchable properties are searching by category. And for the one, substance abuse and mental health, there are also subcategories. So this is a very useful tool. So for example, if you're a researcher and you're interested in depression and you want to see the type of studies that have used measures of depression, you can look mental health. This one has subcategories. You can look at depression and apply. And here you get a list of all of the assessments that measure depression that have been used in these studies. If there's a specific one that you're interested in, you can click on that one. So let's say I'm interested in the BDI. I would click on that and not only have a description of the BDI, but more importantly, have a list of all the studies that have used it before. And again, this is very valuable. So if let's say I'm a researcher that is doing work on comorbidity of mental health and tobacco use, then I might look through these and see, and I'm focused especially on depression, I will look through these studies and see if any of them are smoking studies or if any of them have measurements that capture smoking behavior. So here, for example, I see the first one is a smoking cessation treatment. I can go back and in the same way look at the other ones, at the other studies on the list. So again, just a really useful way to find some information. Other things that you might do if you're currently a CTN investigator and you are considering different assessments for your trial, you might look at a specific assessment. So let's say the ASCII Lite. You believe you've seen it in previous publications from CTN trials, you can click and see what studies have actually used the ASCII, and you can see truly a lot of studies have used this. So that might put you in the right direction of using that with the idea that you'd later be able to have pooled data across these different studies. So these are some different things for you to consider. I hope that gives you some general kind of direction for using the site. So what we can do is move on to the second part of the presentation, and Abby will take it from here.
Okay, hello everyone. Again, my portion here is much less about the whole point and objective of the DataShare website, but kind of tips and tricks that I've learned on how to use it. I always joke that of the 4,000 downloads, I think 500 are me. For all my presentations, I always redo downloads to make sure the website's had a lot of improvements, and it's really wonderful. Some of this is going to be a review of what Dee talked about, but in terms of the document, I cannot stress enough the importance of reading the protocol. Don't just download data and think you can analyze it. There's a lot of nuances that you really have to pay attention to, and I have been guilty of not reading the protocol and ended up having to go and do things all over again. One thing to really pay attention to is eligibility criteria. For example, there's some studies that require a participant be an opioid abuser, say on a DSM-3 or DSM-4, or they require them to be opioid dependent. These are very different. Then there's, of course, it only requires, some studies will require that you not only have to be dependent, you have to be dependent in the past 30 days, you have to have a positive UDS. You need to really look at all these things because your eligibility criteria are going to impact how you analyze the data, but also whether you can compare different studies if that's what your goal is. The other thing to look at is visit timing and windows. So you want to know which visits you'll be able to analyze if you're going to look over time and what those windows are. And of course, you want to know the procedures for data collection. So you want to know which forms are filled out at which visits, etc. So the protocol is incredibly handy. The other thing that you will absolutely have to have from the documentation that Dee mentioned is on the website are the annotated CRFs. These are, I think we've all seen case report forms. These will have the variable names. For the case of CDIS data, and I'll get to that in a second, you'll also get what's the domain name. You get the code list, and the code lists for each variable are very important because you may, the same question, for example, a yes-no question. Yes could be one in one data set in one study, and in another data set, yes is coded as 2. So you need to look at all of these elements to determine how you're going to analyze your data. The other thing the annotated CRFs are very helpful for is to identify the name of the actual data set, because when you go to DataShare, you're not going to get one large data set. You could get 20, you could get 30, you could even get more, depending on the study. So the other key is that, as I mentioned for the domain on the annotated CRF, the domains are actually the data file name. But again, I'll get to that in a second, a little more detail. The other thing that's very important is that there are documents explaining what has been done to the data in the de-identification process. So those are the de-identification notes. There's also a new document for some of the recent studies called the nulled values document. And there's lots of fields that get nulled. For example, site. You're not going to get site ever. So site will be in all the data sets, it will be blank, and the document nulled value called nulled values will show you that. Now here's the thing. There are times where what you're interested in may be site effects, and you really, really need to have site. If you want to evaluate differences in the prevalence of, say, opioid use disorder and some comorbidity, you need to have site, obviously. So what do? All you have to do is contact the PI from that front page on the data tab. You can contact them and you get permission to receive that data from them. As far as NIDA is concerned, once the data is, once the lead investigator receives the data, it is their data and they can share it with whom they like. So if you see something that you really are interested in, but it's just not in the data set, I encourage you to contact the PI of that study because they or members of their team can provide it for you. So in terms of the data structure, I think we didn't see it in the demo, but you'll see when you go to download the data. There you basically, there's two types. One is called the CRF level, and one is called CDISC. Now, CRF level, I think, is probably what most of us are used to, where for each case report form, there's a different data set. These are, I'm calling them wide because essentially there's usually one row per visit per participant, and every column is going to be a different question on the case report form. Now this means if you want to make an analysis data set to analyze a whole different number of assessments, there's a lot of merging that has to happen. Now CDISC is an alternative format. It is going, I think actually as of about a week or two ago, it is now required by the FDA and I believe strongly encouraged by NIH. But at this point it is required by the FDA. I do not remember what it stands for, but these data sets, I call them long and narrow because it's now there's going to be one row per visit, per participant, but per question. Okay? And then there's a very limited number of columns because the columns would essentially be just the value, the answer to that question. And then, sometimes there's different units, so you may have, milliliters, you may have cc's, all of those will be different columns. But so it's a very different way of looking at the data. The nice thing about this is that it makes merging not so much of a problem. And the domain names, like I said, on the annotated CRF, you will see that those are the names of the data files. And the names of those files are actually standard. And that is the goal of CDISC, is to standardize all of this across all protocols. It's nice. The tricky part is mapping data from the annotated case report form to the actual CDISC data. That is not trivial and requires paying very close attention to your annotated CRF. I don't want to go into too much more detail on that because it's just beyond the scope of what we have to do today. But I just want to show you an example. This is when you download the CRF level data. So these are ones where it's one row per participant per visit. This is for CTN 52. It's the urine drug screen data. So we have the protocol, the participant ID, and just so you know, this is not the participant ID that was actually used for the study. This is just for data share. And then visit number, so for each visit, and you can see that this person, let's see, the first, I don't even know how many rows, let's say, the entire screen is all one person. And then each column is a question on the data set. Oh, I wasn't using my mouse, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can get, there we go. So the next example, if it will go. Okay, this is what CDISC data looks like. And so this column here is domain. That is actually going to be the name of the file. So it'll be vs.csv or whatever you ask for. And again, one row per visit, per participant. These are how you do the visits. And this essentially is the question, this VS test column. Okay? And there's many different ways to code the visit. So that you, again, really pay attention on the annotated CRFs for CDISC on how you define visits. So in terms of the actual data that you download, you generally have a choice between ASCII files and SAS files. So the ASCII files, those are just comma-separated text files. They're very easy to read into SAS or SPSS, Excel or Stata, or I assume EpiInfo. The SAS files, they're actually not usually SAS. How we think of them, they're called SAS transport files. Their extension is XPT. However, there are some studies where the data is actually in a standard SAS format, which is SAS7B DAT is the extension. Those can be read directly into SAS and SPSS, I believe. You don't have to do anything. The other thing to think about, I think particularly with SPSS, you have to think about whether there's a formats catalog or not. And you'll see this when you download the data. If there are formatted values in the SAS data sets, there can be some issues with SPSS. So you may want to think about having someone load it into SAS and strip all the formats and then give you data sets that you can use in SPSS. Okay, come on. There we go. So just on the de-identification, I did talk about this a little bit already, but you are not going to get the participant ID from the original study, so do not worry. If you want to call the investigators, I have a question about participant 007, they're going to have no idea who you're talking about. The only person who has the link between the data share ID and the actual participant ID is the contractor who performs the de-identification. As I mentioned before, you do not get site, and all of the free text fields are dropped. Okay. To answer Margaret's question that she asked, all dates are converted to study day or to dates in informed consent. The definition will be in the de-identification notes. And age will be the same. So you will not get the date of birth, which is what is usually collected, but you will get their actual age. And I think usually it's age at randomization. Sometimes it may be age at informed consent. Now, I do request, sometimes things slip through the cracks. So if you ever see something on DataShare that you think does not fit these de-identification criteria, I encourage you to contact the DSC, anyone you know here, or me. I'm happy. Just let us know, because we want to make sure it comes down for the safety and security of all of our participants. So just some helpful hints. Again, I kind of mentioned these already, but for CDISC, how you identify the type of visit, whether it's visit in week 1, et cetera, is generally in 2 different variables, one called epoch and one called visit name. And you kind of have to combine them, and it's a little tricky. So in my analysis, I've taken to just using VSDY, which is the visit day. That kind of helps me solve that problem, but it doesn't help you when you're trying to say, how many people had a visit in week 2, because everyone's visit day may be different. Again, the domain is identified on each annotated CRF. The other thing to think about is when you're merging, particularly with the CDISC data, be very, very, very careful. Just really pay attention to what you're merging on, because you can get yourself in trouble. The other thing to remember is, as Dee said, when you are actually using this data and publishing, you have to reference data share, but I think it's also very important to reference the primary manuscript for these studies. And those links are on each study's webpage on data share. The last thing I want to say is that, remember, these are raw data. So you really have to keep that in mind and look at your data before you analyze it. So a lot of times you'll see inconsistencies. Participant is age 27 in one data set and they're age 28 in another. Really pay attention to those. The other thing is really pay attention to how missing data is coded. Okay? In one study, on the ASCII, it may be 97, in another study it may be 96, and yet another study could be 99. You really have to look at that, because it will impact your analysis. Now, that being said, I have done an analysis on body mass index using, I think, about 10 CTN studies on DataShare. And we realized when we looked at weight over time, this is just one study, that we had people with weights of 0. That was not the code for a missing value. So we said, okay, I'm glad we noticed that. We dropped those people. Then we plotted it again. Now, on the x-axis here is study day. So there's somebody here who I'm kind of jealous of, because apparently they lost 100 pounds in about 5 days. So that would be really cool if I could do that. But, of course, they then put it right back on, and they're back up to 200. So that really stinks. But so this is what I mean. All of these ups and downs here are massive. And so simply looking at your data will really, really help you in making sure that you're doing what you need to be doing. Now, again, I'm a statistician. I think I have about 1 minute left, but I do want to just go over the key, very basic issues with doing these secondary analyses. One is your false positives. The only type 1 error that's going to be preserved is in the primary manuscript, really. Do you need to adjust in a secondary manuscript for the typo and error? I don't think so, because any secondary manuscript, whether pre-planned or not, is really just hypothesis generating and exploratory. You're not going to make any causal assumptions or anything like that. The other thing to remember is these analyses really are most likely going to be underpowered. The only outcome that powered the study was the primary outcome. So in all likelihood, you're going to be underpowered, particularly for mediation and moderation analyses. Moderation, you know, you're dealing with an interaction term, and that automatically brings you some convergence issues, et cetera. The other thing, again, is to interpret all of your results with caution. Again, you never say causality. These are not pre-planned analyses. Sometimes you are even looking at covariates, say, in your model that are post-randomization, so you've already lost the adjustment for confounding. And again, you know, when you describe what you've done, you absolutely just be transparent. You know, say we did not adjust for multiple comparisons, and the analyses are just exploratory. And of course, always cite data share. And so given these caveats, I know I sound very discouraging, but I'm not. The data share is an incredibly valuable tool, and I really encourage people to use it. I think I've given 5 or so of these presentations. It's really a wonderful, wonderful tool. If you do have interest in secondary analyses and you're wondering about some of the statistical issues or reporting issues, there was a separate webinar that George Bigelow, myself, and Dan Feaster gave for this education series, and that is posted on the CTN dissemination library. Here's the link. But it goes into much more detail about the statistical issues and reporting issues. Here are just some references on CDISC. This is their official website. The standards for CDISC are here. And I actually found this nice little thing on kind of the best way to import CDISC data into SAS. I don't know about SPSS, but I assume it's fine. So here's just a few resources. This webcast I already referred to. Dee, who spoke earlier, also has another paper that was published in Clinical Trials a few years ago on the DataShare website. And again, this is the funding opportunity that I referred to. Dee referred to. This one, the deadline is actually October 5th, so I don't think anyone's going to get in for that R1. But again, that's, I believe, like the 3rd or 4th iteration of it. So definitely think about applying when it gets reissued. So now I think Tracy, Dee, and I would like to open it up for questions.
I have a question, Abby. This is Jeremy Wolf. Yeah, I was just wondering, I know that I am affiliated with the CTN, so I know I can use DataShare, but I'm curious, do other people who are not affiliated with the CTN, are they able to use DataShare?
Absolutely. Anyone can go and use that website. If you're not affiliated with DataShare and with the CTN, and you use only DataShare datasets, then you do not have to submit it to the Publications Committee. But if you are affiliated with the CTN, we believe the guidance is that you should submit to the PC. However, we really encourage you to contact Jack Blaine and George Bigelow about whether you need to do that or not.
Thanks, Jeremy. Any other questions?
Hi, this is Julia also. I'm wondering how many publications have used DataShare?
That's a good question. I think that there have been over 15 and maybe slightly more to date. So there are a lot of publications that have used this and even more presentations, some of which I've seen in various scientific conferences. So there has been a lot of use. Now, all of these are on the CTN Dissemination Library website, so you can find them there. So that's great. Thank you.
Okay, great. If anyone does have a question later, please send us an email at ctntraining@ms.com, and we'll make sure to get those over to our presenters. So it doesn't have to be right now, but if you are working with DataShare later, feel free to reach out to us. Abby and Dee, thank you so much for sharing this information with us, and we hope to see more use of the DataShare website. At the Dissemination Library's website for training, We're going to post a recording of this session so you can reference the information at a later date. Give me about 10 days to get it up there. I'll work with the librarians to do that. But it will be a resource for everyone here at the CTN. And also, we invite you all back on October 19th, where we will discuss preparation for drug management and accountability in a CTN clinical trial. That will be Beth Jeffries from the CCC, as well as Patsy Novo from the Greater New York Node. So we look forward to that as well. And that will end our session today. So thank you for coming. And again, Abby and Dee, thank you for making the time to share this with us.